Hi again then guys, and welcome to another car review, of course in the world of Gran Turismo Sport, and you'd probably be assuming, understandably so, that I would review the Megane road car after the safety car, and then maybe the Group 4 race car last. That's wrong. Because I'm reviewing this one first. There's no particular reason why, I just felt like it. Now, as far as this car goes, along with the Scirocco and the Toyota 86 and maybe one or two others such as the Peugeot RCZ, they're known for being relatively OP, or at least as OP as any car can be within a racing class, in Group 4. And although I have alluded before to the reason, the primary reason in fact, why I believe that's the case, for those who are maybe unfamiliar with my reviews, the general idea and theory that I have is that any vehicle that is tuned up to a specific level will tend to be better than a car that's been neutered down to that level. So for instance, if you compare, for example, a Veyron, a Viper, a Corvette, a Ferrari 458 in Group 4, well, they've taken massive power losses and sometimes weight increases just to allow them to compete. Then you take something like a Megane or an RCZ or a Scirocco, they've got more power, less weight, and a ton more downforce than what they had stock. So of course they're going to be great, and of course they're going to feel great. And although that by no means guarantees them victory every time, certainly if you have a better driver in one of those more exotic cars, of course they can win, but it is an interesting way of potentially giving yourself maybe a leg up on the opposition if you are newer to the game or less experienced, or maybe just in a lobby of people who aren't quite that level of skill. Like a Nations Cup finalist, for instance. If they're not that good, then chances are choosing something like a Scirocco or a Megane could give you an advantage. Now this one does tend to be synonymous with OP, at least from what I've heard in GT Sport. I personally prefer the Scirocco, even after driving this one and reviewing it. The Scirocco is still my go-to car in Group 4, because it offers a lot of the same advantages, I just like that car more. And although I, of course, always refer to the natural specs that these cars have, you do definitely need to take all of those with a pinch of salt, because Group 3 and especially Group 4 is very much so subject to balance of performance, or BOP, and 9 times out of 10 it doesn't really matter what the ultimate power level or lowest possible weight of a car can be. The Veyron, for instance, feels incredible if you drop the weight, better than it ever has before, but that will very rarely, if ever, actually be useful in a BOP race, because they never allow it to be that light. Likewise with a car like the Megane, sure, you could give it more power, you could drop the weight, but you're not really going to get that chance all that often. So, what's far more important than that is, how good is it already? Well, that's the great thing about the Megane, and this really speaks to my two biggest pieces of advice that come from the balance of performance effect, and that is, in order for balance of performance not to affect your choice of, let's say, Group 4 car too harshly, you need to choose a car that has two things. A car which you feel naturally comfortable with without needing to do extensive overhaul style tuning to it. Secondly, you need a car that isn't too neutered by the BOP effect, because both of those can have the same problematic outcome. And what I mean by that is, if you have a car that you are comfortable with once tuned, but not particularly comfortable with stock, well, you can't tune it yourself in a BOP event, so it could well be a car that you will never enjoy driving, and of course that's going to work against you, because you're already battling everyone else on the grid. You don't need to be fighting against your own car as well. That's the worst possible thing you could do. The second thing is, of course, you need a car which is good, in effect, stock, because balance of performance changes everything anyway. So just like with being comfortable with the car, you need a car that you know what it's going to do, you know how balance of performance is going to affect it, but it doesn't matter too much because you like the inherent vehicle. You know the way it handles, you know the way it performs, and you get along well with that. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a perfect car, but it has to be a car that you have a handle on. You know the car, you know what it's going to do, you know the kind of performance it can give you, the kind of lap times it can do, and of course, choosing the right car for the right track will always come into play as well. And I must admit, although I've probably done a fairly equal amount of Group 4 and Group 3 racing, in sport mode at least, I will say that Group 4 really stands out to me as being one of those classes where you must deliberately choose the car with the track combination to get the best out of it. And of course that does apply with Group 3 as well, but I just personally feel that difference a lot more with Group 4. For instance, when I raced on Willow Springs in the Scirocco, I could feel that it wasn't that great for that particular circuit. Something like a front-engine rear-wheel drive car, like a Toyota 86 for example, had a definite advantage. It was small and light, but unlike the Scirocco and the Megane, it didn't have the front-wheel drive understeer, and that could easily give it the edge on a track like Willow Springs, where you've got these long sweeping corners, which are certainly not conducive to understeer. And understeer is exactly what cars like the Scirocco and the Megane, and even something like a Peugeot RCZ will give you. Now in terms of the spec that this one has, incidentally, it is a 2 litre, just like the road car, 350 horsepower stock, a pretty impressive 333 pound-feet of torque, and of course it's not heavy, 1100 kilos. But like I said, take all of that under advisement, because balance of performance can change all of it at a moment's notice. You can have more or less power, more or less weight, and then you can't change any of the other settings anyway. Ultimately, my verdict on the Megane is I can see why many people like it, I can see why it's considered to be OP. My personal choice will still remain the Scirocco, because the cars are so similar that you could basically just choose whichever one you prefer, as far as I'm concerned. Some people might find the Scirocco better, other people might find the Megane to be quicker. I could understand the argument for both. For me, I do prefer the Scirocco, because I prefer Volkswagen as a brand, I prefer the Scirocco as a car over this generation of Megane at least, and I personally like the slight sharper style that the Scirocco has. It's a little bit more aggressive, I think, than the Megane, which is a little softer through corners. But either way, they're great cars, all of the front-wheel drive options have definite advantages, and for sure, as I said, some disadvantages too. Ultimately though, choose the right car and track combination and you will do well. This is a good choice to go for. If it's not the kind of car that you love, then it is one to keep in mind in terms of a strategic choice. You know what I mean, one of those cars that you're not necessarily a fan of, but you tend to keep one around in your garage because it's a weapon for the right occasion. The Megane and the Scirocco, even if you don't like them, are definitely cars that I would recommend having around for that very reason. Even if you don't use the car all the time, it can be good to have in your arsenal, because under the right circumstances they can be very, very good, and certainly, as many people accuse them of being, kind of OP. Overall though, that's it for my review of the Megane. We will get around to the road version as well at some point, and of course, until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.